What's up, everybody? This is Mr. Storm, and in this video we are going to get into one of my favorite features in Unity 3D, which is the terrain system. The terrain system is going to allow us to create some really incredible outdoor environments very quickly, and in this video I'm going to very succinctly, we'll try to make it as quick as possible. I'm just going to show you how to use the system. I'm not going to get too deep into, I'm going to try not to get distracted with the detailed work and try not to make my map as detailed as yours is going to be, just so I can show you how it's done. You don't need to sit here and watch me paint on textures for 3 hours. But for you, I want you to get as detailed as you possibly can and try to really make sure this environment looks great, because this environment you're creating is going to be used to create the fantasy game that we're going to create before the end of this term. Okay, before we get into it too deeply, before I start adding stuff to my scene and popping trees in everywhere and whatnot, I want to talk about some efficiency settings that we need to pay attention to. In Unity 3D, by default, all the lighting is baked in every time there's a change that happens to the scene. That's problematic for us, for those of us who are using computers that aren't as powerful as, most game developers. We want to make sure that we're not taxing our CPU too much while we're developing, especially if we've been working on a scene for a couple hours and our whole system crashes and we lose a bunch of work. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Window, and we're going to go to Rendering and choose this lighting. Choose this lighting option. Now in this panel we have some options we need to pay attention to. Let's shrink this down a little bit. First off, I want to turn off real-time global illumination, right? I want to make sure that that's not on, because I don't want global illumination. So global illumination, very quickly what that means is, in the real world, whenever light hits an object, some of that light, depending on the color and the texture of that object, some of that light is reflected onto other sources. And so those other sources pick up that global illumination lighting. In Unity, we have that ability. So for example, if light is reflecting off of a red leather couch, you're going to see a little bit of red lighting coming off the wall or shining onto the wall behind the couch, right? And Unity allows for that. It makes it, it makes our scenes look really great. But I don't want that on right now, because I don't want that to happen in real time while I'm just building and testing my scene. Before I build my game and put it out to the masses, then yeah, I want to turn this on so that my game looks as good as it can. But for right now, I'm going to leave that off. The same thing down here is auto-generate. I want to turn that off as well. Unity by default tries to generate lighting every time there's a change. If I put a tree in my scene, Unity has to go, okay, how is the lighting going to be affected by this tree that you just popped in there? I want to turn that off, because I don't want Unity to be running a bunch of calculations trying to figure out how the lighting is going to be affected by one tree, especially if I'm putting 100 trees in my scene. I don't want to have to wait every time I place a tree down for Unity to get caught up. So we're going to turn off real-time global illumination, and we're going to turn off auto-generate. That way we can edit our maps in peace and not have to worry about waiting for our computer to get caught up. Okay, so now that that is done, let's take a look at our default scene we have here. We have our main camera, our directional light. Well, let's put something in there. First of all, we're going to be focusing on terrain today. Okay, so a terrain is essentially just a flat plane that we can do all kinds of things to. We can paint textures onto it. We can elevate or decrease, de-elevate the height of objects within it. You'll see in just a second. But terrains are made, the whole system is made so that we can make more realistic looking outdoor environments. So let's build one. All we have to do is come over here to our hierarchy, right click, go to 3D Object, and select Terrain. So now it put my terrain in there, but this thing is impossibly large. Okay, we do not need a terrain this big. Especially for this little project that we're about to put together, we do not need a terrain this large. So what we can do is we can shrink it down, especially because if we're using a computer that's not as powerful, the larger the terrain, the more detail exists in that terrain, and the more likely our system is to crash. So let's go over here to the inspector. Let's click on the settings button under our terrain component. Let's go to settings. And let's go down here to mesh resolution on terrain data. In there we see an option for terrain width, terrain length, and terrain height. We're going to want to drop all of these down to 100. Now terrain height just essentially states how high can my objects be, how far up can I go. And honestly 100 is probably more than we're going to need, especially for this project, but we'll just leave it at 100 for now. Okay, so that's a much smaller terrain for us to deal with, which is exactly what I'm looking for. Now, it's a bit hard to tell how big this really is, right? This could be really, really large, or it could be really small. One trick that I like to do is let's make sure our terrain is at 0. It is. Let's actually put it at 50 and 50. Now let's keep it at 0, 0. Sorry, I was trying to do something fancy and then I decided against it. Let's keep it unfancy today. All right, so what we can do is we can actually bring in a 3D cube. And let's change its height, so it's Y scale, to 2. And let's drop that cube onto our scene, onto our terrain. So, let's get in here. All right, so notice that this is essentially the height of a person in a video game, right? This is going to be the height of our first-person player controller we're going to bring in. And so this is going to help us to kind of get a reference for how big objects are in our terrain. So, you know, maybe it looks a bit smaller than you expected, but honestly, for this little project we're about to do, this is going to be perfectly fine. 100 by 100 is perfectly fine. All right, let's get into actually making this terrain look the way we want it to. I'm going to select my terrain again. Now over here we have some options that we want to pay attention to. One option here is create neighbor terrains. This will allow us to add other terrains, just clip them right onto the edges of the terrain that we have, so we can expand the size of our map if we want. We're not going to do that today. We also have paint, this paint terrain option with a bunch of different options we're going to talk about in a minute. We have paint trees, which we will do, and we have paint details, which will allow us to add grass and flowers and stuff. Then we have our terrain settings here as well. Let's go to the paint option, and let's go to raise or lower terrain. This is going to allow us to increase the size of or raise our terrain up as we're, you know, manipulating the map. So I do not want this brush that is just a circle, right? Because watch what oh, that's way too high. Watch what happens when I have this circle brush and I start raising terrain. Notice that it doesn't look very, oh, hello. It doesn't look very natural. I need to drop the opacity by quite a bit. It doesn't really look like a mountain, right? So I'm going to undo all of those things that I just did. By the way, if you forget, undo is Control Z. All right, and I'm going to grab a brush that looks a little bit more like a mountain. Let's try that. That looks good. Okay, and I'm going to increase my brush size to about 65. That looks good. And I'll keep my opacity about 12. That's fine. And I'm just going to come in here and just start kind of lightly clicking. I'm just trying to raise, oop, I clicked outside of my terrain. I'm just trying to raise the edges of my terrain here. Now, if you click and drag, it'll raise a little bit more. I'm just trying to raise the edges. so that we can kind of contain our person in the terrain a bit. And again, it's helpful to get down here at the same level as your player and kind of take a look at what's around. Now, the reason why I wanted to raise the terrain on all the edges is because standing in the middle of the map here, I don't want the player to be able to look out and see like the edge of the world, right? If we're trying to simulate a real world scenario, then the world isn't flat, right? No matter what your Facebook friends tell you. The world isn't flat. So if we see just the edge of a world, then that kind of ruins the immersion for us. So I'm just going to add like a little bit of a mountain there. I might actually reduce my brush by quite a bit and make like a smaller like mountain peak. Okay, so I have a mountain there. I'm gonna make like a lake over here. So let's kind of like a mountain lake, like a pond. So let's fill that in so that I have a place to put my water. Now again, that's going to be kind of small. So let me come over here and add some more detail in the pond. Now notice that I've only been increasing the height of objects here. I've only been increasing the height, but you can decrease as well. I keep clicking outside of my terrain. You can decrease as well by holding shift. So I'm going to make this as low as possible. Get a nice pool going, because I want to put some water in here later. Okay, that looks good. Let's go back to adding in some smoothness here. Adding in some more mountain terrains. Okay, so at this point I think you get the idea. I'm going to try to not get distracted by all the details. One other thing that you can do as well is we can click here, go to smooth height. Smooth height will allow you to kind of smooth out the terrain a bit more. I need to increase the opacity. It allows you to smooth it out so that it's not so jagged. Okay. All right, so that's about good for elevation. Now let's start talking about texture. So I want to paint in some textures in my environment. Actually, sorry, I just remembered one thing I want to do over here. Let me very quickly add that in. So I'm going to drop this all down to the base height because I want to put a cottage over here later. I want a nice flat place to put a cottage. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, this looks pretty good. All right. So we want to paint in some textures. So let me go ahead and go to Paint Texture. And now I don't really have textures that I can use. So right here I have Terrain Layers. We need to add a new layer. So let's create a layer. And now notice I don't really have any textures I can use that are great, right? Nothing that looks like a road or grass or mountains or anything like that. So what we need to do is we need to bring in an asset. And so the best way to do this is to go to Window, go to Asset Store, and this window pops up. This says Asset Store has moved. If you're using an older version of Window or of Unity, the Asset Store will just pull up right here in this panel and you'll be able to search for whatever you're looking for. But in the version that I'm using, it's actually just online. So you just click Search Online and it'll open up a web browser. All right, now notice that I'm signed into my Unity account here. You want to make sure you're signed into your Unity account on the Asset Store as well as in Unity itself. Where are we going? Account. So I'm signed into both, right? With the same account, because that's important, because when we start looking for something like terrain textures, now notice that we have some terrain textures here, but some of them cost money. right? So like this would cost me $10, and I don't want to spend any money. So over here on the side, I want to click free assets. So it only shows me assets that are free, right? And there's tons of stuff. Look at this cool grass texture, realistic nature, wood texture, terrain textures, snow. All these are great. The one that I'm going to use for this tutorial is this outdoor ground textures, and I've already downloaded it before. But I'll show you how you do that. So you click on the texture or the asset pack that you're looking for and click open in Unity. For you it would be, I think, download, right? Now over here in Unity, notice this new folder called the package manager has been opened. And inside I see I have outdoor ground textures, okay? That has already been downloaded. So I'm going to import. So you'd need to download it and then import it into your scene. So I'm going to click import. And it's going to take a second and it will import these textures into my project. Okay, so I have this menu here. This is going to ask me which textures do we want to bring in. I'm not going to be picky. I'm just going to click all of them. Alrighty. Now over here, notice that I have ADG textures and I have all of these different textures here in my assets package. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my scene. Now I'm going to go over here and click Edit Terrain Layers again, create a layer. And now notice I have all those new textures that I just brought in. They're all in here, okay? I'm going to choose, for now, I'm going to choose Ground 5, okay? And that's going to add Ground 5, the Ground 5 texture, to my entire map by default, okay? That's a good base layer texture. Now, one thing that I'm noticing here is that maybe the texture is a little bit, I don't know, maybe it doesn't work exactly the way I want it to. So if I click on the texture itself, I can come down here and I can change some things about it. I can change it to metallic, so I can make it more metallic, but that's not what we want. I can make it more smooth, but that's not what we want. I can change the tile settings. Now, tile settings are really important. What tile settings do is they basically say how many times are we going to repeat this texture in the environment. How many times are we going to repeat this texture per unit? Now 10 is obviously too big. I think I'm going to go back to 2 because that looked like a good setting. And it's always good, let me get rid of this brush here. It's always good to look at your textures from the perspective of where a character would be standing, right? Now this is just a base level texture. We're probably going to be coloring over top of most of this stuff anyway, but it's good to get a good base level texture that looks good for your game. Okay, next let's start painting in the texture for this mountain over here and some of these mountain ranges. So I'm going to go back to my terrain, go to paint textures. I'm going to add a new layer. Oh, sorry. Create a new layer. And let's find a good, let's do this. That looks like a good mountain. All right. And then what I can do is just start painting in the texture. Let's make sure we have a brush that looks good. That looks good to me. And I'm going to lower the brush size as well and just start painting in the texture on top of the mountain here. So I want like a white mountain peak. And I want it to kind of fade away. So I'm going to lower the opacity, kind of fade in down here. Okay. And then I'm going to add another texture as well. And it'll be a bit of a darker gray. And just kind of sporadically add this in as well. Now again, I'm not going to spend too much time playing around with textures and stuff. I'm not going to spend too much time painting in textures, but you get the idea, right? And make sure you get around the sides and the back and stuff. But it's really that easy to paint in textures. Let's go ahead and find a good dirt texture. So let's create a layer. That's a good dirt. Let's go with this red. No, I don't want the red. Yeah, I want the red. All right, we'll go with the red dirt texture. And I'm going to use this brush. Increase, oh, that's way too big. And increase, oh, I have the wrong one selected. Brush this in and just kind of brush in some dirt. This is going to be this is going to kind of be like my starting village here. So I'm going to brush in some dirt here. Keep it going, keep it going. And oh, maybe I can add in, let's do another one here. Some lighter. As like a path. Kind of going up to the river here. Now if we get down to our character, notice that the lighter path area doesn't look extremely great. You can change the tiling settings again to kind of make it a little bit more detailed, fine-tuned. That looks pretty good. Okay, now again, I promised to you that I wasn't going to spend all day painting in textures, and I realized that I'm spending a lot of time painting in textures, so I'm going to leave it alone at this point. And we're going to move on to the next thing, because we're over 20 minutes in and we haven't even done any trees or anything. Okay, so let's go to trees here. Edit trees, we can add a tree. Now, we don't have any trees yet. So what we need to do is go back to our Unity store, go back to the online store here, and we need to find a tree. So I'm just going to type in tree, make sure it's free, a free tree, if you will. And I'm going to look for a good tree that I want to use. Let's do, oh, I've used these conifers before. They look really good for a forest. So I'm going to use these. Open in Unity. Now again, you can use any of these you like. I'm going to download any asset that comes in to Unity free. Any asset you can find that's free that you like, you can use. You don't have to just use the assets that I use. I'm going to import those. Okay. And it's doing its thing. So this pack that I just grabbed, this conifers pack, it has a couple of different styles of trees, and we're going to use a couple different ones just to kind of variate, add some variety to our trees in our game. You can just use one tree, one kind of tree if you want. I like to use multiple kinds of the same species. Does that make sense? So some, like with these conifers, there's one that's more full, there's one that's more, kind of straight up and down, there's smaller ones, bigger ones. So I like to vary the trees, makes it look a lot more natural. So it looks like I have this error here, shader warning on bark. Okay, that's fine. I can just ignore those. I don't need to see those right now. All right, so now I have my conifers thing here. Let's go back into terrain. Let's go to our tree selector. Oh, hold on. Okay, now we can go to edit trees, add a tree, and in here I have my trees prefab. So I have a bare conifer, a tall conifer, a medium. I'm going to use the tall. All right, and I'm going to click add. All right, let's go back to my terrain. So I have my tall conifer here. I'm going to lower the brush size considerably. And I'm going to randomize my tree height. I want to make sure my tree density is pretty low-ish. Let's see, random tree rotation. We'll add some color variation. That's great. Now what I can do is just start painting in trees. Now notice that these trees are very, very, very tall. So these conifers, these tall conifers, I might want to save for, actually, let's see, they're very tall for my scene. So let's lower the tree height by quite a bit, and let's get rid of these that I've already put in. There we go. So they look a lot better. So then you just start painting in trees here. You just click and drag and paint in trees. Oh. Now notice that there are some areas where I'm not painting in a ton of trees, just because I know that I'm going to be adding in a different style of tree, and I want to be able to paint those in as well. Oh. Okay. So let's grab another tree. Let's add a tree. And let's do this. Let's do a small conifer. How about that? Looks good to me. And we can start painting those in as well. A lot of trees. I'm gonna have a ton of trees in my scene. Okay. Now the other option that we have is we can mass place trees. That's not an option I use often. So if you click mass place trees, you can just say, hey, I want 10,000 trees in my scene, and then hit place, and it will auto-populate trees. I don't use that option often if I'm working on a smaller map, because if I'm already working on all my detailed work, I don't want trees to end up in the middle of my villages or my paths or whatever. Okay. So there we go. That's good enough for trees right now. I could spend a lot more time playing around with this and making it what I want, but we need to move on to the last thing before we run out of time. Okay, so over here we have paint details. Paint details. This is basically, this allows us to kind of paint in grass and stuff. All right. So with paint details, where are we going? We can come over here and find a detail brush that we want to use. But we haven't really downloaded anything important. We haven't downloaded a good one yet. So let's do this. Let's go back to the Unity store. And let's go to grass. Again, make sure it's free. And I like this grass flowers pack. I'm going to open that in Unity. I'm going to download it and give it just a second. And import. And import. Okay. Now let's go back to our scene, go back to our terrain, click Edit Details, and let's add a grass texture. So in this new grass flowers textures, we can find a nice grass that we want to use as a texture. I'm going to drop that in. And I'm going to just start painting. Let's go back. Hello. Add grass texture. We'll grab that one. And add. I forgot to add it. Let's lower the brush size here a bit. And now when I, ooh, that's gross. That doesn't look great. So here's the problem, right? The colors don't look great. So let's edit. Let's drop the colors. Let's make the healthy color green, but a lot more muted. And the dry color, that's looking better. That's a bit more realistic. We want to reduce the opacity by a lot. Oof. And we want to reduce the strength by a lot. So that way when we paint in, man, the density is just way too much on these. So let's see. There we go. That's a little better. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of all the grass that we've already placed. Oh, I don't want to change the color settings that we did well. All right. How do I... Oh. So we can erase details by holding shift. It takes a little longer, but that's okay. The other thing I want to do is I want to lower the height of this grass as well. So minimum height is going to be 0. Max height will be about 1.3. Okay. Yeah, that looks about right. So then we can just come in here and just start brushing in grass wherever we want it. Now the nice thing about grass in Unity is that as we go away, notice how it's disappearing, right? It doesn't render every single blade of grass all the time. It allows you to kind of get rid of grass if you're not looking at it. That reduces CPU draw as well. Okay, let's just get a little bit more grass in the scene. Okay, well, we're over 30 minutes now, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. But with those techniques, right, sculpting your terrain, painting textures, adding trees, and adding grass, you should easily be able to come up with a really nice looking environment. Spend some time on this, make it look as good as it possibly can be, and you know, make it something that you're really proud of. Once you're done, I want you to zip your entire project folder together. So you will find your project folder by going to File, and then actually no, it's under Project Settings, Package Manager, maybe? No. Where is it? Let's see. Properties, maybe. No? Okay. Well, whatever. You can find your project folder by looking at where your project lives normally. It's in project. And yeah. Finding out where you saved your project. It's in here somewhere. Whatever. I can't find it. Anyway, finding out where you saved your project, going to that project. Let's see. Mine is in games, game design, and then this is called Terrain Teacher Edition. So you would find your project, right click, and send to compressed folder, and then turn in that zip folder. I want to be able to open your project in Unity and then take a look and kind of move around in your scene and see what it looks like. It's going to take a bit to zip, and it's going to take quite a bit to upload, but I want to see the whole project itself. All right, we have 30 seconds till this video has been 35 minutes, and this is the longest video by far I've made. So I'm going to cut it now. I'm going to let you get started. Please let me know if you have any issues or questions. All right. See ya.